What up, y'all? It's your boy Coffee Kid back again with another episode of The Observation. It is currently the evening of July 10th. It's been a couple weeks since I've recorded one of these. I've been out of town, traveling, but nevertheless, we are back and we are better than ever. Today, I have a very interesting video for y'all. I actually tuned into it when I was doing my traveling during my spare time. And it is a video of John Lennox. For those of you who don't know John Lennox, he, to my current understanding, is a mathematician. So he's very well versed when it comes to the edges of science and the edges of physics and the edges of creation theory, because science and math at his level especially are very correlated in how they have in their role in explaining the universe, let's say from a materialistic standpoint. But Mr. Lennox argues for the existence of a God, and specifically, he takes the disposition of Christianity. So he believes that God came down in the flesh, fully man, fully human. God brought himself down to atone for humanity's shortfalls and pitfalls, rather. So I just wanted to provide that context. Take that in, if you don't believe in God. If you do, I think it is worth noting the angle he's coming from. Very important to know who is speaking and where their perspectives are rooted in. But nevertheless, he's answering a question on, I believe it was suffering, but I mean, you'll see shortly here. But to my recollection, it's a very profound question, right? These are questions that we are all going to have to think about at some point during our lives. And if you're truly still, if you remain still and truly think about it, I think there's only so many options that you can truly land on. So, that said, I think that's enough context into what this is about. We will jump right in.
The hardest question any of us face is not the question of science and God, it's the question of suffering and God. Now, that's not our topic tonight, ladies and gentlemen, but you wanted me to say something briefly about it? Do you? I come to North America frequently, and it's the question that comes up most often. We're faced with awful questions in our contemporary world. And the problem is that when you ask it, when it gets into the room, you realize, first of all, that there are two kinds of suffering. There's moral evil, the bad things people do to one another. And there's pain, cancers, tsunamis, earthquakes, and so on, that we don't immediately blame other people on. And then there are two perspectives. There's well, let me put it this way. Cancer looks very different to a professor of oncology than it does to the young woman at 25 with 3 children who's just been told she's 6 months to live. And when this question comes up, there's an intellectual side and there's a pastoral side. And you've got to be aware of both. So very, very briefly, and this is hopelessly inadequate. So what I'm going to say now is this. I have a website, johnlennox.org. But if you Google my name in New Zealand, I arrived in New Zealand 2 days after the earthquake. And I had to change every lecture, every TV interview, every radio interview, earthquake, why? And somebody has put them all together and they're still there. And if you want to hear what I say in detail, but very briefly, it's this. I understand people that become atheists because of suffering. I've been to Auschwitz many times and I've wept every time. What do you say? But the atheist route has problems. Because if you say, well, that's just how the world is, Richard Dawkins does this. The world's just what you'd expect it to be. If at bottom there's no good, no evil, no justice, DNA just is, and we dance to its music. That's his view. But half a minute, if there's no good and no evil, why are you talking about the problem of evil and pain? Where do you get the concept of good and evil from if you deny the existence of God? And I want to go down that route because I spent a lot of time in Russia. And for many of my Russian friends, Dostoevsky was almost a prophet when he pointed out, if God doesn't exist, everything is permissible. He didn't mean that atheists couldn't behave well. Of course they can. I believe that all men and women are made in the image of God as moral beings, and of course they can behave. What he meant was there's no rational justification for morality if there's no God. Just as I believe, and I've explained to you tonight, why I think there's no rational justification for science if there's no God. This is a parallel thing. So the atheist view has huge problems. And of course, what does it solve? The one thing it doesn't solve is the pain or the evil, still there. So what do we do? Well, let me tell you very briefly what I do. We've all asked the question, surely if there's a good God who's all-powerful, there'd be no evil. So he can't be good or he can't be perfect. You've all heard that, haven't you? And you've all spent hours like I did as a student going through the night. Surely a good God would, could, might, should, all this kind of thing. Have any of you ever come to a satisfactory conclusion after that? No. Not one. I've never met one. Do you know why? It's very simple to see why. Because when we finish the discussion, we're faced with beauty and barbed wire in our world. Or beauty and bombs. It's a mixed picture. That's our problem. And any explanations that don't face that just don't wash. They don't work. So how do we cope with beauty and bombs? That's putting it very bluntly. But you know, if we don't face these things, we can't solve the problem of if God was this and this and this and this, then surely he would. The fact is, we got beauty and bombs. I'm a pure mathematician, and one of the few things I've learned from that is, if you can't solve one question, change the question. So here's my question. Granted that it's beauty and bombs, is there any evidence anywhere in the universe that there's a God that you could trust with it? Now that's a big question, ladies and gentlemen. I believe there is. See, at the heart of Christianity is not only a resurrection, but a cross. Now come with me. You might find this difficult, but I often say to audiences, look, at least listen to what Christianity says before you reject it. Like I listen and spent my life listening to atheists and Hindus and so on and so forth, arguing their case. At least listen. The claim is that the man on the cross was God incarnate. That's a colossal claim. But come with me. If he was, it raises a very deep question. What's God doing on a cross? Well, at the very least, and I've often sat beside people who are suffering intensely, and some of you may be right now, and said at least that tells us that God has not remained distant from human suffering, but has himself become part of it. That's a window, ladies and gentlemen. That's a window, but it opens. Because if that were the end of the story, there'd be nothing more to be said. But the resurrection now tells us that death is not the end. And when the early Christian apostles went out into the world and preached the resurrection, one of the main points they made was it guarantees there's going to be a final judgment. That's a marvelous thing. Justice will be done. The women and children that screamed their way into eternity in Auschwitz Does God know about that? Of course he does. Now, this is a huge issue, and I almost hesitate to compress it like this. But ladies and gentlemen, the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ now become a huge focus for something absolutely colossal. Not only does the cross mean that God has drawn near to us in our suffering, it's much deeper than that. If Christianity is true, Christ took upon himself all those things that cause suffering. All the mess that I've made in my life that's caused other people to suffer. And sometimes I thought it was wonderful. My snide remarks, my hate, my jealousy, and all this kind of stuff. He's taken them upon himself so that he can forgive me. Science has nothing to say about love. It's nothing to say about forgiveness. But the biggest thing that I need as a human being is forgiveness. Is there forgiveness? Human guilt is one of the biggest problems in the universe. Now, as I say, this isn't our topic for tonight, but you did ask me to say something about it. And what I would leave you with this. I do not know of any window into this hard question that bypasses the cross. But what I do know is that millions of people have stood at that cross, and by trusting Christ and receiving him into their lives, they've received new life. You know, so often at these meetings in science, people say at the end, and I'm finishing with this, they say, you know, you're a scientist. Aren't you an idiot, really? Because sitting there talking about Christianity, Christianity is not testable. Who told you that? Christianity is testable, ladies and gentlemen. You know, when you watch young people who are dependent on drugs or narcotics, and then you meet them 6 months later and they're free, and you say, what happened to you? Where's the radiance come from? Well, and this is the way they will put it. Well, actually, I found out about Jesus Christ and I trusted him and I've got this new power, and I watched a TV program last Sunday, I think it was, at home. And it was about narcotic dependence and older people, and this house that looked after them, run by Christians. And somebody said, what has this house made to you? And the man said, you see that door into the house? I walked through there and I got saved. Saved in the sense of his life saved and made meaningful. Why? Because they told him about Christ. You see, as you see, I'm pretty old. I'm probably pretty near the end of my life. But I have seen again and again and again and again and again transformation in life. And when you see 2 and 2 make 4 thousands of times, you begin to believe that 2 and 2 make 4. What's it got to do with? It's got to do with Christ. That's the evidence. If that wasn't there, I would quit. But it is there. And I've lived with Christ for over 60 years. And in my family and with my wife, we've put it to the test again and again. Now you say that's all subjective, but in the end, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. If there was no evidence of that kind, there would be absolutely no reason to believe.
Dang. That's crazy, man. Shout out Mr. Lennox for his dissection of that common crossroads that we face in our minds. My takeaway is pretty brief, I think. So when I kind of take a step back and glance at his argument, glance at his effort to persuade towards belief in Jesus, to me, it's threefold, right? You have creation. What do we do with creation? What do we do with the notion that we have the ability to forgive? We have the ability to love. We have the ability to discern good from bad or evil, right from wrong. Why do we have this transcendent meaning that all humanity agrees on, right? distinct from an animal or a cow or a lion, distinct from other species. We have this transcendent ability to forgive, understand love, understand hate, understand all these complex things. So you have that at the base layer, and that surrounds creation, right? So we have creation. Who created? Did God create, or were we simply just matter? And are we simply just chance? Because if that's the case, there's a lot of meaningless and subjectiveness to life, that anyone can do whatever because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. But me personally, I believe the contrary, that Jesus Christ did in fact live, did in fact die, and did in fact rise. So now, let's say you get past the base layer, right? The layer of creation. How are we even here? The second layer is, okay, if there is a God, who is he? And Mr. Lennox, he hits it on the nail. He's right. Who is this God? And we get a glimpse of the cross. This isn't just a God who sits in heaven on his throne like the kings of the world do and point their finger and disagree with that and state their opinion on that, but do nothing about the ultimate fate of their people, right? Jesus is not a king of the world. He is not like the kings of the world, rather. Okay? Mr. Lennox puts it perfectly. Who is this God? The claim of Christianity is that God himself came down, lived amongst people for 33 years, saw the darkest parts of humanity, kept pushing on, grew up as a child, saw what that was like, was a young adult, saw what that was like, and at the end of it all, died, right? He think about, if you are the, put it in perspective. You're the creator of the universe. Let's say we've gotten past layer 1, okay, which is a painstaking argument in and of itself, but we've gotten past that. Let's say you are the God, the creator of all earth. Imagine the humility that it takes for you to come down, live amongst these minuscule people who you love, bear their struggle with them, advise them, teach them, leave your word and your peace with them, and then die for what they have done. Think about that. So the cross describes who is God, that second layer. Now when he rises and he's no longer with us, at least physically, there's the third level. What does God call us to do? Who does he call us to be? And I think Mr. Lennox nails it perfectly, right? Because amidst all of this, amidst this whole giant theological, historical, religious debate, amidst all of this chaos and uncertainty and argument, we have just the regular people in the middle of it all who have to wake up, live, go work a job, who have to put food on the table, who are worried about the mortgage rates, financing their future life, who are worried about planning for their career, worried about getting a degree. All these people are worried about these things, and within worrying about these things, pain occurs, natural disaster, health, death, divorce, pain, violence. All of that is occurring within this larger debate, within this tussle for, is there a God? Who is God? What has God called us to be? So Lennox puts it perfectly, because you can't use the moral debate at the base layer of this to someone who just lost their, daughter to cancer or something of the sort. It's just not feasible. You have to instead jump, who is God? What has he called us to do? He's called us to be with these, to support the weary, right? And he himself, says, cast your cares and your worries upon me. to the mom who's grieving, to the father who doesn't know where his son's going to end up, to the son who never had a father. Think about that. So to the, to the atheist or whoever may be watching this that maybe is unsure or doesn't agree with God, I think you have to tussle with the base layer, right? Is creation. Maybe not. Maybe this ordered structure is not your way. Or I don't want to limit that to that, but what I would suggest, based off what Mr. Lennox said, is it's truly worth another look. It truly is worth another look. The Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." But the first section of that is be still. We have to take the chance and really put our time and our mind and our energy into really figuring out what's going on here. What's the deal? Right? You can work a job, you can get a degree, and you can collect a check every year, and you could be a wealthy man and live on repeat and live in that cycle of consumption and be happy by the world standards. But there will come a time when your mind has to wrestle with these subjects and when your mind is searching for truth. So that's all I really have to say. I just think it poses a lot of valid questions based on a lot of warranted claims. Like, what are we doing here? So, shout out Mr. Lennox. Truly a profound apologist. And he's debated, some of the, forgot to mention that earlier, he has debated some of the leading, agnostics or atheists about the notion of God versus the notion of materialism, the notion that we are ultimately just happenstance. The universe in and of itself is, a collection of chaos and happenstance, and we are just here. So, that said, I'm gonna try to squeeze in some of these Lennox videos anywhere I can, just because I think he's truly a profound speaker. I know a lot of videos I do try to focus on the Afrocentric lens of Christianity. They're all under the same bucket, which is Jesus Christ lived and died and rose, right? But each audience has different ears, and I think Lennox is definitely one of the more profound speakers, and he does reach a wide audience with how he's able to argue the gospel. But yeah, really, really interesting argument. Really, really cool. With that said, I'm gonna read a verse out of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, collection of verses, starting at verse 17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That last verse, I'm going to repeat. Verse 21. God made him who had no sin become sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. That's exactly what Lennox highlights. That is that second layer of who is God. Well, here we get a clear glimpse. God is someone who was willing to be the worst of all of us, even though he didn't know what that was. You know what I'm saying? Like, he knows what sin is, but per se, he was not able to be that. He became the worst of all of us, past, present, and future, right? So that we might become righteousness if we simply believe, accept, and become new, right? Not just believe and accept so that, oh, if God is true, well, now I got my base covered type of deal. No, that's not a true heart transformation, right? He reveals his nature and extends us the opportunity. And just like the beginning, we always have a choice, right? We always have a choice. So he's not here to judge our sin. That's what is a common notion of Christianity, and it's honestly a common notion in part due to Christians. And honestly, a heavy part due to Christians. So we must be careful um, about how we discern who God is based off what you see man doing, even if it's a Christian man. We cannot discern God based off what man is doing. We have to go search for ourselves, really find out who he is from what he's left us behind. But I'm going to leave it there. I hope everyone has a good week. I appreciate the views. I appreciate if, you took something from it, disagree, agree, had a thought-provoking moment, didn't think this was entertaining. I encourage y'all to leave your thoughts on all of the above or none of the above in the comments. Just if you just want to say anything, I'm happy to respond and engage as much as I can. But I'm gonna leave it there for y'all. I appreciate it again if you made it this far. But with that said, this has been another episode of The Observation with your boy Coffee Kid, where we talk about what it was and what it is. Hope you'll have a blessed week. See you next time.